I'm so excited to have you all joining us for today's talk. I think this promises to be a real highlight in the talks program for this year. It's a conversation that Devika and I have been so excited and eagerly anticipating. Before we kick it off, I'm just going to say a few quick thanks. First of all, to our board, patrons, members, sponsors, and partners who make the work that we do year-round possible, as well as during the festival. So thanks to them. Thanks also to the staff and volunteers who literally make the festival run. That includes year-round staff as well as seasonal festival staff and an incredibly dedicated core of volunteers who come together and really make the festival function on a granular level. So thank you to them as well. And thank you to you, our audiences, who come out for film screenings and events like this year-round as well as during the festival. Programming for a cinema wouldn't make any sense without an audience. It wouldn't serve any purpose at all. And so we very literally owe what we do to you. So thank you for being part of that audience. As a nonprofit, Film at Lincoln Center does rely on the support of its community. It's specifically its membership. We have a really incredible and robust membership program here at FLC that I think nourishes an especially energized and involved and engaged community of film lovers who come together in our spaces. And we're really privileged to work with them. I'm just want to make a pitch. If you're not already a member, consider becoming one. There are a bunch of different tiers of membership with different levels of involvement. You can find out more on our website, filmlink.org. And while you're there, I would also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, which throughout the duration of the festival will be sort of a hub for information about added screenings, events, special offers, discounts. And throughout the year, we continue to have a weekly newsletter that gives you information about all the other programming that we're doing in our cinemas, which do operate 365 days a year. So come back for more. I want to finally just say thank you to HBO, the presenting sponsor of NYFF Talks. And just urge you to follow us on social media at the NYFF for continuous news, photos, Q&As throughout the festival that will be made available. It's been a really extraordinary festival so far. We're just about at the halfway point. Last night we celebrated the Centerpiece Gala, which is a great moment to sort of look back on the previous week of cinema and look ahead at the coming week. So we hope that you'll be back to join us for more screenings, events, talks. We got another week of great stuff on offer. For today's conversation, as I teased at the beginning, this is part of the deep focus portion of the talks program, in which Devika and I look at the lineup of films in this year's festival and think about artists, filmmakers, and other luminaries involved in these films who we would like to engage in really deep diving conversation about their work, their careers, their lives, their perspective on the art that they have dedicated themselves to. And this year, we really sort of had a moment of realizing that a no-brainer subject for a deep focus talk would be the novelist Sigrid Nunez, whose two novels, The Friend and What Are You Going Through, were source material for two highlights of the lineup in this year's festival. The Friend, which screens in the Spotlight section, and The Room Next Door, which we presented last night with director Pedro Almodóvar as the Centerpiece Gala selection. Both films are extraordinary and very distinctive adaptations of an equally extraordinary literary voice. And I won't say too much because I think I want to leave plenty of time for the conversation, and we're really just incredibly lucky and fortunate to have Sigrid with us. And leading the conversation will be New York Times critic at large for the New York Times book section critic at large, A.O. Scott. And of course, also a very experienced film critic and commentator. So I think this promises to be a fascinating discussion of adaptation and identity and everything that goes into the novels that gave rise to these films, and I'll just leave it at that. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Sigrid Nunez and A.O. Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful Saturday. And if I'm not mistaken, we were both at the screening last night of
Yes.
The Room Next Door. And so I wanted to start with that, with your experience. That was your first time seeing it.
Second.
Yeah?
I saw it a couple of weeks ago in a screening room. This was my first time with an audience. Yeah.
So
what
was it like?
Well, it's an unusual experience, right? Of course, because you're writing a book. You're not thinking about it as something that's going to become a movie, but because it takes so long for a book to become a movie. I've had a long time to get used to the idea, and a lot of people have said, oh, it must be surreal, it must be very, very strange. But on the other hand, I found that wasn't really my experience. I think it's partly because, just staying with the Almodóvar, I know his films, and I'm a huge fan. And what had happened was that I had gone to see the movie Parallel Mothers. And I came home and I got on my computer and there was this email saying that Pedro Almodóvar is interested in what are you going through. And for a minute I thought, well, that's just too much of a coincidence. This must be some sort of a scam. They're very paranoid. They knew I was at the movie and now they're going to tell me to click on this link and then my computer will explode.
We just need the last 4 digits of your social security number.
Exactly. And then I thought, oh, well, that really makes sense, because I thought about the women's friendship, and also because I knew that for quite a few years now, he's been obsessed with questions of mortality and aging. So I thought, well, I could tell, what could become cinema from what I wrote, and what probably wouldn't. So in a way, when I saw it, there was certain surprises because he has changed what happens, like the ending radically. But in a lot of ways, I think because of those two actors and how they embody those characters, it was very familiar. And then there's a tone, there's a certain melancholy tone to it. So there was it felt kind of natural to me.
Did that project come first, or which? Because there are, as Maddie was saying, there are two. There's The Friend, and which is the earlier book. But how did the two film projects evolve?
The Friend came first because David and Scott acquired the rights to the Friend way in the beginning. They read a review. They thought that they would like to have this, to make a movie out of it, and that was 2018, and they got started, and then they had made some progress. I think they had finished the script, and then the pandemic happened. So I was thinking, well, maybe now this will never happen. Time passed, etc., and then there were other obstacles. For example, the strikes. And that's why these movies ended up happening at the same time. Now, the Almodóvar, I think, was 2021 that he got in touch with me. So, yeah.
Last night, this sort of gets to something that you were just saying. Last night, Pedro, in his remarks after the screening, said in his wonderful, inimitable Pedro way that he said, I was very unfaithful to Sigrid. I also love that he pronounced your last name with the th, with the Castilian.
He did.
Nunez.
Yes, I know.
I'll always think of you that way. But it was interesting that he said that, because obviously, there are things, if you've read the book, there are things that have changed in terms of the plot. There are some things that have been streamlined, some things that have been added, as is always the case. But from my perspective, and I'm more interested in your perspective, it seemed to me quite faithful in that there was something about the sensibility and the voice that I recognized.
Right, that's it. In spirit, it is. It really is, and it's true. I don't know whether he feels guilty or what it is, but even afterwards, he did come up to me and said, "I was unfaithful. I know I was unfaithful." But I mean, you'd have to be very foolish to expect that a movie is going to be a faithful adaptation of your work. I mean, the reason why it's been such a pleasure with both of these movies is that it never occurred to me there was going to be a transcription of the book and a faithful adaptation. It wouldn't really. I mean, who needs it? Really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always thought it's a very overrated virtue in adaptations. I mean,
well, it's
fidelity.
true, and also I mean, to me, when you hear people say, "Oh yes, that." The book was better than the movie. The movie was much better than the book. But actually, those two things are not there is no such thing. The book is the book, the movie is the movie.
Right.
One can't really be compared with the other, and people forget that.
And I've always thought of it as a kind of an interpretive act, that you have
Exactly.
one artist, and the stronger the interpretation, in a way, the stronger the misreading, or the more that the filmmaker feels confident to be unfaithful, or to in a way, depart from the trying to literally translate or recapture what's on the page, the better the film will be, and the more it'll exist independently of the book.
Yeah, and also I remember that I would hear quite often from different sources that including Naomi Watts at first when she was reading the book, that this is going to be impossible. The friend, it's just, this is not adaptable, and I never felt that way, because it was very, very clear to me that it was not going to be possible to adapt the interiority of that character. But on the other hand, though, she's a writer, and so she's thinking about writing, and she's writing. It never occurred to me it would make an interesting movie to watch a writer write. I knew this was like,
it's never been done in the history of cinema.
Right. It's like I knew that was going to go, and I knew and that was fine with me. And I knew that what was interesting to them had to be, even before we met, was this story of this woman and the dog, and they're both grieving. And that, to me, of course, I saw a movie there. So I never understood this unadaptable, line. And I mean, and it's like, with the Almodóvar, it's mainly about that relationship, that friendship.
What's interesting, because I wanted to ask you about exactly that, and about two performances in particular, Naomi Watts's and Julianne Moore's, because they're similar characters in both. I don't know how many people have read the books or seen the movies, but in both cases, they are, in the book, a first-person narrator who is perceiving and filtering and interpreting what the other characters, human and canine, and in the case of What Are You Going Through, feline, are going through. And so you have a very rich sense of their interiority and their perspective and their understanding of what is happening. You don't have that in the book. I mean, in the film, in quite the same way. So in some sense, the other characters, the Tilda Swinton character, or the Bill Murray character, or the Great Dane character in The Friend, have sort of an easier job. But both Julianne Moore and Naomi Watts, I was struck by, had to figure out a way how to convey, without doing lots of voiceover or lots of obvious stuff, what the character who's the narrator in the books is going through. And I wonder what you thought about that, how you sort of saw that as a translation of your own work.
Well, that, I was very impressed with that. Again, not surprised, because I know their work, and I know I had an idea of how they would interpret this character, what they would do. And I think they just, with both of them, what I really liked was that they were both in a very vulnerable situation, and they allow themselves to be vulnerable, but they always maintain their dignity. I mean, they're both, it's both in these strange situations, like, and with the friend, it's humiliating, you know. I mean, there's the dog, and she's going to lose her apartment, and people make cracks on in the street about you like them big, that kind of thing, and you know, I mean, she herself said that she was drawn to the story partly because of the absurdity of it, and so she's there all. You know, I thought it was remarkable how she allowed herself to look like a grieving person. And to look even a little bedraggled at times, you know, still lovely but not glamorous. With Julianne Moore, I think it's that that intensity that she has again in this crazy situation. I mean, even in my book, my feeling about the character is that she says, "Yes, I'll do this for you," to her dying friend. I say specifically because she didn't know how to say no. And then when she gets there, she feels like an idiot. But she feels like, well, I can't leave now. I said yes. So, you know, so they're kind of hapless, these women. I think of them as having a certain amount of incompetence in how to live. And also because they're both getting older, they're alone. Mm-hmm. You know, they are the support.
Right, and they're kind of imposed upon, or you might say taken advantage of,
right,
by people who have these very specific, very unusual needs. Will you come be with me when I end my life? Will you be the caretaker of my 150-pound Great Dane?
And maybe lose your apartment.
Lose your apartment. And in the way that Pedro adapted it, maybe go to prison in the Julianne Moore case.
Right.
So, I mean, he emphasized that sort of more than it was in the book. But so there's an interesting kind of, you say incompetence, or you might say kind of passivity, or
yeah.
That they kind of let these people and animals,
right? Because they just
take advantage of
them. And by doing so, they gain a lot, mm-hmm, without ever, you know. But I mean, I think of the fiction as exactly that. Like, you know, you're going to write a story or a novel, and the situation for me is always you have to answer a question. What if? Mm. All right. So, what would you do? You know, because this is not taken from my life, right? Okay, so what would you do if your friend left you the Great Dane, you know, and it was going to have to be taken care of, or more likely put down, and not end up in some kind of, you know, what are they called, refuge or whatever?
Right.
And what if? Because this seemed quite even more likely than the situation with the dog. What if all of us? Someone asks us this very question. This could happen to a number of people in the room. I mean, that somebody says, you know, I have this illness and I've made up my mind and I'm going to do this. I need some help. Like, it could be a relative, it could be a friend. But what if? What would you do if mm-hmm. that happened to you? And that's really what engaged my imagination to try to see what that might be like. Maybe hoping if I write about it, no, this will not come true. It will never happen.
And both of these characters also are writers, and this is where I think, you know, sometimes people assume, I know that you've said in interviews before, people are surprised to find out that you didn't foster a giant dog.
Right. Right. Vivian Gornick walking by my apartment, they let you keep a Great Dane here? I can't. And then I said, oh, no, I made that. You made that up?
But in both cases, the writers grapple with how to tell a story, what to make up. There's you know, the part where in the film where Tilda Swinton's character Martha, who's been a war correspondent and a journalist, talks about, you know, the one time that she made something up, and there is, I think, in your books too, often. Sometimes a very kind of winking reference to the idea of autofiction, which which is, one of the sort of cliches of our time, that people only write about sort of, what they know and experience, and write very close to their own lives and their own selves. I wonder what you think about that idea, or that kind of.
Well, I think, it's what I'm writing is faux autofiction. It's a kind of a trick in a way. It's okay. They're not. For one thing, most of my books are hybrids. A certain amount in it, is autobiographical. I guess the best way to put it is, if I have, like in both of these books, okay, so there's the first person narrator. When she's reflecting on things, thinking about things, etc., those are actually the author's opinions and thoughts. I would never attribute to her some strange idea about this or that I didn't have. But at the same time, there's always the story, the narrative that's moving the story along, and that's 100% fictional. So, I call it like trying to have my cake and eat it too. If I write it like it is autofiction, and then I have the narrator be so is someone who is my gender, around my age, lives in New York, and is a writer and teaches writing and reads a lot, that is going to happen. The reader is going to think I'm reading something that's true. And, so I kind of want that to happen. On the one hand, I want people to know that I have an imagination and I made this story up that you're enjoying so much. I don't want people to think that I'm just transcribing from my life. But this way, if you present it like that, memoir-like, you could say, some people say, oh, it's faux autofiction, but I could also say, as some have said, it's like, it's memoir in form, but not in content.
You could, one way I think of it is that it's fiction that takes place in the identifiably real world.
Yeah.
That it's not, which isn't to say that it's realism, or sort of a representation of the world that's realistic, but the actual world. Like, these things seem to happen in the actual world that we, and city, and cultural milieu that we live in. And one of the things that I think signals that, which is fascinating to me, and it was especially fascinating the way that Pedro kind of adapted it, is the books and films and other cultural experiences that people have. Because you reference real books and real movies.
Right.
So these people are made up writers in a way, made up characters, but part of the stories that inform their lives and their understandings of their lives are actual. In most cases.
Yeah, and there's also the point that if I'm making if I were writing a book where the first person narrator was a surgeon, I would have to, I'd have to bring the reader into hospitals. I would have to show that character surging, or that it would have to, you can't just put this label on it. Oh, she's a surgeon, and so it's the same thing. If I'm calling the character a writer, if I'm making the character a writer, I have to build a life of what's a writer's life like. And a teacher, and what kind of life is there? I have to do enough of that, make enough of that world. So without it being like watching a character write. So I just take that from my own, these are the books that this character would be reading, or movies, that she would be seeing. And, and one thing sort of leads to another. In other words, like I don't plan out my books. So I'll be writing, and then I'll think, oh wait, didn't Flannery O'Connor say something like, and I want that. I want to put that in. I want to, what those things that occur to me, literary references and so on. I want to be the freedom to to put that in, and I think that people enjoy reading that too.
And I think it's actually one thing it only occurred to me watching the film last night that you have in common with Pedro Almodóvar, which is that in so many of his films, characters are reading and watching movies, and you know, whether it's Tennessee Williams or the Joyce's The Dead in this case, that these are characters who, that is part of how they live and how they experience the world is through art and literature.
Yes. And I assume so do many, that's also true of many of my readers.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. But something that I think is interesting, and one of the reasons that I really, I mean, one of my favorite things about the way that you're writing is literary in that respect, is that you avoid what seems like a kind of a sentimental idea about the value of literature and culture, because it's not the idea that it makes us better people or that it makes the world better. I mean, it's very, very important to everyone in your books, but it doesn't improve them.
No, I mean, and I think that came with from a little bit from impatience with how often we seem to be told, and we seem to be telling other people, that reading will make you, reading literature teaches empathy and so on. It's not that I'm saying that isn't true at all. I'm just saying if the reading of great literature made people, a certain way, nourished empathy, compassion, etc., then English departments in universities all over would be full of warm and fuzzy people instead of the well-known strife, hostility, backstabbing, etc., which exists. It's like, I'm not saying that it doesn't teach empathy. I'm just saying that somehow it's been presented in the last, I don't know how many years, as like almost a lesson that we can teach the rest of the country or world or whatever. If you read as much as I did, you'd be as empathetic as I am.
Right.
And we wouldn't have all these problems anymore. We wouldn't have polarization, et cetera.
Right.
So that comes from that, really.
Yeah, and because the corollary to that is if or the answer to it is if you knew the writers that I know, you wouldn't you wouldn't think that.
Right, it's true. We're true. Writers who do the most reading, we're thinking they're not known for their kindness or any of those nice things. I mean,
no,
or their good looks.
Well, and I mean, and that's an interesting. I do want to touch for a beat on an aspect of these books, and also of your next one, The Vulnerables, which is that going to be a movie? I hope that's a movie.
No, I don't know, but I hope so. That'd be nice.
But anyway, these all of these books really foreground the relationships among women and friendships and rivalries and connections among women, but they're also shadowed by men, by problematic men, and in one of the things that I think is fascinating about The Friend, and it comes up also in What Are You Going Through, is that a whole lot of cultural narratives that have been very much on people's minds for the last however many years about, toxic masculinity, cancel culture, Me Too, are present in these books, but also looked at from I think an unusual angle that is both very critical and does also have an element of compassion in it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that really comes from, writing is thinking, right? And so, if I'm writing about characters, then I have to give a certain amount of thought into the relationships and why people behave the way they do. And it is true, if you really think about it, you can't just have this one-sided view of. I mean, things are complicated, and you have to look at the whole situation. So that's genuine. I mean, I feel like that's just reflects the way I feel about men, about relationships. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's some compassion there, right? But like you said, the problematic men, and then the thought did cross my mind. Is there another kind?
Well, fair. That's
There's not another kind.
well, and that seems to be true. Just given the way that the character, the way that the women in the novels, the narrators and others feel about the men. The writers played by Bill Murray and by John Turturro and others, and also the young man, the troubled young man in the Vulnerables. That there's an absence of illusions, but also a kind of, I don't know. Well, I mean, compassion. It's not quite tolerance because it's more critical than that, but just a sort of a very realistic view, I guess.
Well, yes, that's what I'd say. To me, it's just realistic. It's not even taking sides, it's just the way things are. Yeah.
Yeah, and that you can love people or care about people, even if they're in some ways even monstrous or awful.
Right, and people are very complicated.
Yeah. So I want to move from people to animals. And one thing that I was a little disappointed. I loved Pedro's movie, but one thing that was a little disappointing to me was that the cat wasn't in it.
There's a reason. Okay, now Almodóvar is a cat person, and he has cats, and he says they won't. They're cats. They're cats we call them cats for a reason. He told me that I haven't actually seen The Human Voice with Tilda Swinton, the half-hour film, but there's a dog, there's an important dog in there, and he had read The Friend, and he said that he found something to steal. He loved this part in the book where the narrator is reading and the dog lies on top of her feet. That somehow really got to him. So he tried to get a dog to do that, and it didn't work. But he just said that's why he wouldn't even he wouldn't try to have cats in his. I can't think. I mean, maybe he has cats passing through some of his films, but he couldn't have them. He couldn't ask them to act. Or even to sit still.
Where's the dog? We do have to pause and say,
dog,
was it
yeah.
was it two dogs in
the dog
in The Friend? Did they use two or just one?
Well, there is a time when it isn't Bing, yeah.
Right.
But it's mostly it's Bing. Yeah, I mean, Bing. I think there's one place where it's not
extraordinary Bing. Performance, I have to say.
Really?
Yeah.
Really.
No, I've always dog performances are special.
Because he does act. I mean, he was trained to begin with. Obviously, he's a show dog. But then Bill Berloni came in and worked with him and taught him how to act. And from what I hear, he was extremely diligent and and would be brought to the set and couldn't wait to leave his cage to get out and do what he needed to do. I mean, he really understood what was being asked and expected of him, and he was just a champ.
That's amazing. Now, and you wouldn't get that from a cat.
Okay, no.
The cat would not leave the trailer. No. And I don't. Again, if somebody. And again, I hope somebody does films The Vulnerables. I don't know I don't know how birds work.
That would definitely work. Yeah, because they're the smartest of all, and that would, and it's not that large a role. I mean, we're not asking that much of the of the bird or the cat.
But what my question was, what had to do with these animals, because these are all stories about grief in different ways, private grief and also in a way more public and shared grief, and it's just interesting to me and striking that in each one there's an animal who becomes a kind of well, just I'll let you say sort of what the relationship is between these animals, these non-human creatures who we invest so much of our own feelings in, and who seem to reflect some of our feelings back to us, and human grieving.
Well, in the friend, it really is. Or the narrator is grieving, and the dog is grieving, and the dog is incredibly important to how the narrator deals with grief, and it's absolutely central. But in What Are You Going Through, the cat is really just, incidental. I mean, the narrator is in an Airbnb and falling asleep, and the cat comes in, and at that point when I was writing the book, I thought, well, I've told other people's sad stories up to this point. People have talked about things that were troubling them. And when the cat jump on the bed, I thought, well, the cat could have a story too. And so I kind of decided to have the cat tell the sad story of its life in such a way that you can't really tell, the reader can't tell, did she dream this, or did this, and so there it's not necessarily, that cat is not, necessarily being a comfort as far as grief goes, but in the vulnerables, not that the bird is intending to help, but there's a certain point where, because the narrator is asked to take care of this bird because its owner is, because of the pandemic and the lockdown, is stuck across the country, and these parrots, of course, they need attention. And she's thrilled because she's feeling what everybody felt during the lockdown and the pandemic. And she's alone. And she's thinking, and she remembers, what they say, when you're depressed, which she certainly is, find someone who needs your help. And it just so happens that there isn't any human who particularly needs her help at that moment, but she finds that, she goes and she finds that this bird is so beautiful, for one thing. And if you know parrots, I mean, they're extremely entertaining. And so he really, he helps her. She goes to help him by taking care of him because his owner can't. But he really brings up her spirits, and that's why she gets upset when the young man comes in, because then he sort of takes over the bird, and she has to face the fact that the bird actually prefers the man.
Well, and it is in both cases a kind of an unexpected or unintended bond that happens
right.
between where and I think you see that beautifully in the film of the friend. I mean, I think it's the how she comes to care about and depend on and need this dog.
Yeah, and when you think about it, because this is in the book and in the movie, you just think about it. There is the threat of her losing that apartment. That's one thing. But in the beginning, she's just thinking this is going to be temporary anyway, so that's not a big issue. But imagine if it's you, that you bring this dog in, it gets on the bed, and when you go near it, it growls at you and says, I'm on this bed, you go wherever you want, I'm not getting off this bed. I mean, a 150-pound dog. And the fact that she would not throw the dog in the street, that she would, even so, I mean, usually in that kind of situation, a dog bites or gets aggressive, people are very willing to just get rid of the dog. And the fact that she would just say, okay, what did she say? Okay,
right,
okay,
right,
she
right.
says, and goes and sleeps on the floor. But that was very believable to me. I mean, I've been in that kind of situation, and I know people who have, where they wouldn't want other people to know what they've allowed an animal to make them do, right? I mean, yeah. You fed the cat what?
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because the relationships between people and animals, between these women and the animals in the books are an interesting foil for because the relationships with people, and I think a lot of us who have animals in our lives have experienced this, that the relationships between people are quite complicated and thorny and difficult, whereas relationships with animals have a kind of simplicity and clarity to them.
Right. It's more. Yeah. You can have a certain kind of unconditional love from a pet. Is that that you don't. Well, I mean, the thing is that if people's relationships with their animals, they're warm. They're able to. They bring out warmth in people. But the other thing is that I'm not even sure why this is, but we humans, we find animals and animal behavior funny. We just, people are always pointing out what the dog or cat is doing and laughing about it and saying, look what he, and so that's part of like writing and with bringing these animals as characters into the books. These books are about some heavy things: aging, dying, suicide, cancer. All right, so you introduce an animal, you have the opportunity for these two things: warmth and humor, and lightness, and that's also a very important part of including the animals in it.
And do you think it kind of works the other way too? That it kind of highlights or allows a dimension of the relationships among the people to kind of to come into relief.
Yes, it does.
Because I mean, one of the things that and I'm not going to remember the quote, but there's a moment in The Vulnerables where I think the character's learning about the narrator's learning about some of the terrible experiences that the young men went through, being bullied and so on in school, and you says about not being surprised at how cruel people are, that people can always find new ways to be indifferent or cruel or mean to one another, and yeah.
Yeah, and she actually says something
it's a
very
little different.
Well,
yeah.
she does. She says something very, very harsh when she hears the story from someone else about how this young man suffered as a child, and then she just has the thought that, well, there's nothing surprising about hearing about human cruelty, and since this is something that started when he was in school, or how early it's starts with humans, how early you can see these elements of sadism and bullying in very young humans, and it's just very discouraging. Yeah.
And the second thought that I had when I read that is that your books are very blunt about that in a way, but also discover new forms of human tenderness and compassion. I mean, in both of these movies are just one of, and these books are so moving because there's such they're almost discovering new forms of love. That is that you wouldn't have thought, a love story about two women who are kind of not very close friends at the beginning, right? Sort of had been friends and then kind of distanced from each other, discovering this kind of this intense bond at the end of one of their lives, and it.
Well, yeah, yes, and that in particular came from this idea that I had heard from someone, which was that watching someone die is like falling in love, or watching someone close to you die is like falling in love. And I knew what that meant. It was about the intensity of it, and I as I say, I'm trying to answer that question, what if, and then create the situation, put the characters in it. And it was actually the way I imagined it would be, was like that. That it would be like them falling in love or and I thought that was very beautiful about the performances, because you see that, and you see that it's not necessarily about their shared past. It's about that house and and what's going on between them there. I mean, because I also think as you know, people have been in this situation when strangers are thrown together because of some kind of emergency. They bond in these very intense ways. And I mean, you remember when that plane went down in the Hudson? Captain, what was his name again?
Sully.
The pilot, right?
Sullenberger,
Okay.
yeah.
I don't know if they're still doing it, but I mean, that was a brief but extremely intense experience. And they have an annual reunion. They want to see each other again because they went through this. And there are, and other people too who have been through that kind of thing, total strangers to begin with. Then they want to continue to know each other, at least to meet occasionally.
And that's connected to the Simone Weil quote that gives the novel its title. What are you going through?
Right. Yeah. That's what true love is, being able to say to our neighbor sincerely, obviously, what are you going through?
Yeah. Do you want to take a few questions? I've just
Sure.
In the Almodóvar movie, the John Turturro character is called a coward because he doesn't take questions at the end of a talk, and I don't want either of us to be
we wouldn't want that.
accused of
No.
cowardice.
So yes,
a few,
for sure.
and just please make sure that they are questions.
As opposed to tomatoes.
Tomatoes, or less of a question than a comment. No? Okay.
Ooh, it's very loud here. Okay. You see these two amazing movies made, and I'm going to see The Friend next week. When you start to write your next novel, and you're, staring at a blank page, does the fact that these movies were made, and that this could be another movie, somehow affect your process? Like, is it something that hinders you, or does it encourage you, or, that's my question.
Neither. It wouldn't, I wrote The Vulnerables knowing that these two movies were in process, also knowing that they might never happen, because you never know what's going to happen. Since I finished The Vulnerables, I've been working on some short stories, and I'm not aware of, I'm still writing exactly the way I always wrote. I'm not aware of visualizing or doing anything that would have anything to do with film.
Or of casting, because you've had Naomi
casting,
Watts
right.
and Julianne Moore, so who's next?
Yeah, exactly. Or they could switch. Yeah, so yeah, no difference, no.
Is this on? Oh, yes. You did speak briefly about the difference between, your movie adaptations and book adaptations, and how there was maybe some reflexivity lost in the film, right? And you didn't mind that. You saw the story. But I'm wondering, could you speak, are you critical still about what a film in general, it doesn't have to be the films that were created out of your books, but films in general lack relative to the form that is the novel?
Oh, I don't. I mean, they're completely different things. In fact, I don't think, when I think about the things that were, let's say, left out of, let's say talk about The Friend, things that were, that were the change or left out, I never, let's just talk about what was not in it, okay? I never thought of that as something lost. You know what I mean? I have had the experience of things that are lost in translation. I mean, that is enough to tear your hair out, what happens with translations, because it's very difficult. But because, they take what's there and they see what will make a good movie, and then that just happens. So I don't, I just think they're two different things. You can't really say that movies can't do this or books can't do that, because we all know that, but it's not, that's just, it's just to say that they're different mediums. Yeah.
Were you involved at all in the process of the screenplay writing, or were you consulted during the process of the making of either of these films?
Just absolutely minimally. From the beginning, my decision was that I didn't want to have. I mean, if I could be helpful in some way, whatever, by answering a question, but it never occurred to me to be involved with writing the script. I have no skills as a screenwriter. And I don't know anything about filmmaking. So my idea was, and I'm very happy with this idea, and it would always be this way. I would advise it to anybody, is to let the filmmakers see what their vision is and leave them free to do it. And I also think that even just being, and so I would answer some questions that might come to me to clarify something or whatever, or make a suggestion. But, my feeling is, I also felt like, well, what if I was involved, right? And then they say, well, what do you think about this? And then I say, well, I think it would be interesting if, and then they say, well, we don't think that's interesting. Like, I could just see, that would really confuse and bother me, and so I just felt like it would just, I'm not a collaborate. There's a reason why I've never been married. Yeah, and I'm so happy. I mean, I just knew this was the way to be and what I wanted, and it turned out exactly as I would have hoped and wanted.
Is it working? Yeah. The women in both films wear very distinct clothes. Were you surprised by any of the outfit choices?
I wasn't. I wouldn't say I was. I'm impressed with them. I mean, they're the costume in both of those. The costume design of the choices, I think are really quite wonderful. And in the Almodóvar, it was so important to him to have the saturated color. Like in The Friend, it's realistic. I mean that is it's yes, she would dress that way. She would and in The Room Next Door, it's not that it's not a realistic movie, but it's not a naturalist movie. It's like a fairy tale, and things are heightened in certain ways, like the dialogue and so on. It's often that's not really the way people talk, but that's true of his other films as well. And so he wanted these, as I've said, if I were going away to spend my last moment someplace, I would bring like a sweatshirt, some sweatpants, warm socks, maybe. I mean, a shawl, but I wouldn't. But Tilda Swinton has this extraordinary wardrobe, but it works. I mean, it's what he wanted, and that the costumes are brilliant in that movie. So, they're an important part of it.
I think so too. I mean, I mean, it's an Almodóvar movie, so yeah, it has that Alberto Iglesias score. It has all of these melodramatic aspects that. And this was what I was writing before I saw it, because I have to say, you're one of my favorite writers. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. And I was thinking, how is this going to work? And because there's such heightened feeling and often artificiality and melodrama in his work, in his cinema, in the world that he imagines. And there are not those things, in your world. But somehow, I felt like what he was doing, being himself, was drawing out some of the feelings and meanings that were there all the time in your book, but just expressed in a different kind of register.
Agreed, and I think that's what I mean about leaving it to the filmmakers, because you don't really know what it was specifically that spoke to them it's not every word, every page, every incident. It's some other thing, and that's what you want to leave them the freedom to develop. And even if it's very different from the book, in my case, it's not that different, but I don't think that matters. I think it's very silly to imagine that that the book becomes a movie. More it's an inspiration for a movie, a book.
And hopefully each one will bring an audience, to the other.
True.
Because they're both wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Sigrid.
Thank you.